Okay, so as Omar has kindly introduced earlier, my undergraduate dissertation was titled How are Muslim Students Represented in the British Press? Before I go into how I conducted my research, what kind of things I found, I think it's important to maybe touch upon why it is that I thought I should do this research. I've always been fascinated by the work of Islamic societies. I've been involved in the work of Islamic societies before I was even a university student myself. When I was studying my A-levels in Bristol, I was heavily involved, thank you very much, I was heavily involved with the University of Bristol Islamic Society. I made a lot of friends there, I attended their talks, I attended their debates, and through the Islamic Society I made a lot of links with non-Muslims, with Christians, with atheists, and I had an incredible 2 years. It was unlike any other social experience I'd ever had. It broadened my horizons. I felt like I was engaging in productive debate that made the community of Bristol brilliant, because we were able to discuss our differences, we were able to discuss our similarities, and it was fruitful for everyone. So I began to perceive Islamic societies as just something that was brilliant, that was great. And at the same time, I pick up the newspapers, I hear the debates about campus extremism, and I'm hearing a completely contrary story in the media, which is absolutely different to my own personal experiences. So when I started my degree in international relations and journalism, I knew immediately that this was something I needed to research. So I looked at 4 newspapers. I can't look at the entire British press, as ambitious as undergraduates might be. I looked at The Sun, The Mail, The Telegraph, and The Guardian. I looked at The Sun and The Mail because they are the most widely circulated newspapers. And they are 2 tabloid papers, so I wanted to also look at 2 broadsheets. The most widely circulated broadsheets are the Daily Telegraph and The Times. However, since I was already looking at The Sun, I decided that I would replace The Times with The Guardian. So I didn't have an overlap in ownership, because The Times and The Sun have the same ownership, and I wanted to make sure that I had a broad sample of the British press for my research. My research was split into 2 main stages. In the first stage of my research, I looked at the frequency of representation of Muslim students. I had a massive sample from 1997 until 2011. I just logged the frequency of articles about Muslim students in these 4 papers. I found that from 1997 till 2000, the topic of Muslim students was virtually absent from newspapers. It was not of any concern to anybody whatsoever, except maybe The Guardian and 1 or 2 articles from The Sun that I found. On average, there were 5 articles a year speaking about Muslim students. Suddenly, after the events of 9/11 in 2001, I find that the frequency of articles goes up to 20 articles a year in these 4 papers. And this was the average from 2001 to 2002. In 2003, there was an anomaly. I found a drop. However, in 2004, 5, 6, and 7, there was a dramatic, consistent increase in the frequency of articles discussing Muslim students. In fact, in 2007, which was the peak of representation of Muslim students, I found that there were 70 articles in these 4 newspapers speaking about Muslim students. After 2007, from 2008 until 2011, I found that what had happened is that the frequency of articles about Muslim students seemed to have regulated and become consistent to around 28 articles a year. So, the key finding of the first stage of my dissertation was that the emergence, obviously, of the theme of the Muslim student becoming something significant in the British press, in these 4 papers, and that it had now become a stable, consistent theme that was being discussed roughly in 30 articles a year for the last 4 years of my sample. So the second stage of my research looked closer at these articles. I wanted to know how are we being represented as in Muslim students, because of course this is an incredibly personal thing because I was researching myself to an extent. So I wanted to see how are Muslim students being represented in these 4 years. The first thing that, I looked at 113 articles in these 4 years, and they were the focus of a detailed content analysis where I checked what themes were being discussed. I wanted to know what issues are Muslim students being discussed alongside. So far I've only established that they're being discussed frequently, and I wanted to know what issues are Muslim students being spoken about. I found that 64% of all articles in this 4-year period, 64% of all articles discussed Muslim students alongside the issues of fundamentalism and extremism. The average of coverage from these 4 newspapers was between 55 to 63% of their coverage speaking about fundamentalism and extremism. However, in the case of the Telegraph, 81% of their articles discussed this issue. 81% of the articles in the Telegraph discussed Muslim students and the issue of extremism and fundamentalism. I also found that 49% of articles on Muslim students discussed this issue of campus radicalization. So nearly half of the representation of Muslim students from 2008 to 2011 is discussing this issue of campus extremism. And I also found that 35% of articles attributed these issues of campus extremism to speakers who are being invited by Islamic societies. I've spoken only so far about fundamentalism and extremism and radicalization. However, 92% of all articles discuss one or multiple of the following themes: anti-Semitism, extremism, fundamentalism, homophobia, radicalization, sexual inequality and gender issues, Sharia law, Sharia punishment, and issues of social cohesion and even terrorism and real security risk. 92% of articles spoke about these issues, while 8% spoke about other things. With regards to these issues, 46% of articles I found painted Muslim students, so nearly half of articles speaking about Muslim students, painted Muslim students as the source of these problems. So how normal are Muslim students? If 92% of articles are speaking about Muslim students in these outlandish themes, as opposed to just regular people who attend university hoping to achieve high grades. 33% of Muslim representation, again in this 4-year period, 33% of representation portrays Muslim students as being actively dangerous, as actually being a potential threat. 24% of all articles painted Muslims as being vulnerable to becoming radicalized or brainwashed or altered in some way through some process of radicalization. 24% of the representation of Muslim students painted them as vulnerable to these influences of radicalization. Another 24% of articles portrayed Muslim students as being just unusual. They were discussed in the context of how they are different as opposed to how they are normal. How, for example, they do not attend certain social events, how they are different, how they do not drink. And it focused heavily on why Muslims are unusual, Muslim students. In the 4 years examined in my study, the Mail never portrayed Muslim students as positive or even normal. In 4 years of coverage, not one article from the Mail presented Muslim students as just being normal, let alone positive. So for 4 years they were represented as either unusual or potentially problematic or really problematic and dangerous. One article in The Sun portrayed Muslim students as normal, while the rest of their coverage, so that's 6% of their coverage, in these 4 years, while the rest portrayed them, again, as either unusual, vulnerable, and dangerous, and obviously none of them in a positive light. The Guardian, thankfully, was distinguished somewhat, and 38% of its coverage presented Muslim students as being normal members of society with normal concerns, normal issues, just trying to live life as a non-Muslim student would. But unfortunately, a less impressive 8% of articles portrayed Muslim students as being positive. And that just broke my heart, because I came into this research believing that Islamic societies were a force for positive dynamics in culture. But unfortunately, the media did not represent this in any way. I have one more finding that I want to discuss with you, and I believe this is the reason why there is such a disproportionate representation of Muslim students. 17% of all articles discussing Muslim students in this period have no sources whatsoever. Now, when I'm speaking about sources, I mean people who have been interviewed, people who have been quoted, their opinions have been asked. 20% of articles would quote government officials, 13% of articles would quote academic staff, and 15% of articles talking about Muslim students, only 15% of articles speaking about Muslim students actually cited Muslim students themselves. And this percentage has been largely boosted by The Guardian, and in the absence of The Guardian's data, only 5% of articles represented the views of Muslim students. In summary, I found that there was a very, very two-dimensional representation of Muslim students. And I believe that the reason for this is the imbalance in who is representing the Muslim students. Overall, if you count Muslim students, Muslim individuals, Muslim organizations, etc., I've also labeled as an authority or a legitimate source to be university staff and university members, because they would know about the situation of Muslim students. Overall, only 23% of articles had a citation or a quote from somebody who I personally would have deemed to be a legitimate source. And at the same time, a lot of the quotes from these people were second-hand as opposed to interviews. And I believe this is at the heart of the issue of why Muslim students are represented in this imbalanced way.
Thank you very much.